Hi, I'm Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary, integrative neurologist. Recently, I shared a post on foods to avoid to reduce kapha, and many of you responded with, well, it seems like everything that is delicious is on this list. So give us some suggestions about what kapha can eat. Now, I agree, the kapha pacifying diet is one of the most difficult diet because it's predominantly a vegan diet. But for those of you who are struggling to reduce your kapha, following these principles, even following them partially, will bring you success. Kapha responds so well to food as medicine. And it's one of the beautiful things about being able to balance kapha is that once it does get in balance, it provides tremendous support and strength to your body and mind. So it's worth putting the effort in. So let's take a look at some of the foods that kapha actually can eat category by category so that you don't feel overwhelmed if this is your primary dosha. Our first category of foods is looking at fruits that kapha can eat. Now, in general, kapha shouldn't be eating a lot of fruits because they're sweet. But the occasional fruit, about maybe one fruit a day, is okay if it fits into a kapha pacifying type of fruit. Now, kapha does well with fruits that are a little astringent and not very sweet. So some great examples of fruits for kapha include apples, pomegranates, cranberries, other berries like blueberries and strawberries, as well as pears. These are all great fruits that actually help to keep kapha in balance while you're enjoying a little sweet treat. The next category is vegetables. Now, here's where kapha has the most reign. Almost all vegetables are good for kapha because kapha really does well with predominantly a vegan or vegetarian diet. The only vegetables that you have to be a little cautious of for eating in moderation are root vegetables that are very high in starch. So things like yams, for example, that have a lot of sugar and carbohydrates in them, you've got to be a little bit cautious of with kapha. But otherwise, most vegetables are perfectly fine for kapha and are actually fantastic for bringing it back into balance. The next category is grains. Now, grains are considered to be heavy in Ayurveda, and kapha doesn't need foods that are heavy because by nature, it is a naturally heavy dosha. So grains should also be eaten in moderation. And when you're looking at your plate should be predominantly vegetables with just a small amount of grains on the side. Some of the grains that are balancing for kapha include amaranth, barley, buckwheat, millet, quinoa, and spelt. So again, it does not mean that kapha has to avoid grains altogether. It's just about choosing the correct grains and making sure that the amount of grains that you're getting on a daily basis is relatively small compared to the amount of vegetables that you're getting. Our next category for kapha is legumes. Now, this is another category where kapha has pretty free range, and almost all legumes are good for kapha. So this includes all of the different beans and lentils. The only one where kapha needs to be a bit cautious is when it comes to soy products like tofu. Tofu does tend to increase kapha when eaten in large quantities. Whenever you're cooking your legumes, so again, your beans or your lentils, make sure that they're well spiced. This helps to break down legumes and make them more easily digestible. When it comes to legumes, it's pretty much a giant green light for kapha. Our next category for kapha is dairy. Now, dairy naturally produces mucus, and kapha is already prone to mucus, so dairy is a category where kapha does need to be very cautious. Ghee tends to be one of the dairy products that is balancing for kapha in moderation. So it is okay to use small amounts of ghee in your food and cooking in order to help balance kapha. Now, instead of cow's milk, because cow milk does tend to boost kapha considerably, I recommend using goat milk and goat milk products as a dairy product for kapha. Again, this should still be done in moderation, but goat milk is lighter and a little bit easier to digest for kapha individuals. Now, of course, we have so many dairy substitutes nowadays. So instead of using milk, you can always choose something like almond milk as your main dairy use in your diet, and that is perfectly okay for kapha. Our next category is nuts and seeds. Now, nuts and seeds also tend to be heavy and oily, and these are natural properties that kapha has. So we don't want to have foods that are like kapha if you're trying to balance a kapha imbalance. But there are a few nuts and seeds that do tend to be well tolerated by kapha. So almonds are one of the nuts that tends to be very well tolerated by kapha. Now, I do recommend soaking your almonds overnight. It helps to remove some of the anti-nutrients found naturally in nuts, and it also helps to make them more digestible. And seeds like chia seeds are also really well tolerated by kapha. So it's not that you have to avoid all of them altogether, but just choosing your nuts and seeds wisely will help keep your kapha in nice balanced condition. Our next category is meat. Now, as I said in the beginning, kapha is a naturally vegan or vegetarian dosha. And that's because it doesn't need a lot of grounding. And that's one of the advantages of meat is that it is actually grounding. So kapha, because it's naturally grounded and heavy, doesn't need meat on a regular basis. However, for that occasional treat, the meats that you should favor if you're predominantly kapha are fish, particularly freshwater fish, which don't tend to be as fatty as saltwater fish, and chicken and turkey. Those are the go-to meats. Now, eggs, as we mentioned before, are not highly recommended, but egg whites are okay for kapha. Our next category of foods is sweeteners. Now, the sweet taste does increase kapha, so we don't recommend a lot of sweet things in kapha diet. However, there is one sweetener that actually helps to reduce kapha and scrape ama or toxins from the body, and that is honey. So honey can be used regularly in a kapha diet in moderation still because it does have a sweet taste, but in moderation, it does help to balance kapha. Now, the only time where you want to be cautious using honey is you never want to put it in hot liquids or cook with it because that produces a toxin, which we do not want. And finally, we have the category of spices. Now, this is another category where kapha pretty much has free reign. There's pretty much all the spices that you can think of are tolerable from a kaphic perspective. And the only spice that they have to use in moderation is salt. Now, in terms of the different types of salts, there are certain salts that are a little bit better than others. I recommend using the pink Himalayan salt in place of just the white bleach salt, but all salt should be used in moderation, but that's the only spice that needs to be limited. All of the other spices are typically balancing for kapha, and you can get as creative as you want. I hope this gives you some inspiration on how to balance kapha in the kitchen. As I said before, I know it's one of the most challenging diets, but when kapha is in balance, it is the strongest and healthiest dosha. And most people who are kaphic and live in balance with their dosha have a pretty strong, long, healthy life. So it's worth incorporating some of these recommendations, maybe just a few foods at a time or looking at the different categories, one category at a time per month. But as you start to notice the benefits of a kapha balancing diet, if you are predominantly the kapha dosha, I think you're going to feel more and more motivated to really pay attention to which foods support you best. I'm Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary, again wishing you health and happiness.